maybe the most important lesson I ever learned when it comes to arrangement, particularly for dance music, particularly for instrumental music, electronic music. Never have every element playing at the same time. Kind of. Hey, we are back going through the song completion kit. We're at stage 4 of 5. So we're pretty close now, although this is probably one of the longer sections to actually just work on and figure out. We're getting stuck into the arrangement. And I think I have a few cool tips for you. This is probably going to be a bit of a longer video. But as we always do, we're going to go through the relevant page in the PDF. And this time around, I'm going to film a lot of my process so that I can talk you through some of the decisions that I'm making as I'm actually doing it. And then we will wrap up by trying to figure out what we've learned, if anything, and give a little preview of what's to come next time. Getting into the stage 4 section of the PDF then, we are at the arrangement stage, a piece of music with a beginning and a middle and an end. This is another one that is really in-depth. It's kind of a skill that I think a lot of us don't really get to practice all that much because so many get stuck at that kind of like loop stage. This is really where the majority of the song actually becoming a song happens. We're trying to think about the overall structure from section to section to section throughout the whole track, but we're also trying to think about what are the details in between the small changes that happen within those sections that keep propelling us forward through the piece of music. Some of the potential blocks at this stage: the arrangement isn't keeping your interest, which is probably down to some of those small changes that I was talking about. Your track having noticeable chunks where everything's kind of static for a set period of time. It might be 8 bars or 16 bars or 32 bars where nothing changes. You've just got a section that's just in a big block, and then at the end of that block everything changes all at once again. We'll look into how to get around that. And then our third one, kind of related to that, is our changes being too predictable. As I've said in previous episodes, humans are just really good at pattern recognition, and that can be really satisfying to be able to have an innate sense of when changes should happen, what's going to happen next. And that kind of feeling of satisfaction is a really great thing to try and harness when it comes to making your music really engaging to listen to. But if you go too far in that direction, where everything happens exactly as the listener expects it to, your track can get really stale, and it's the little surprises and the upsets and the, oh, I didn't expect it to do that, that really bring a track to life and keep us engaged. It's not just about establishing and adhering to the pattern, it's also about diverging from that pattern in interesting ways. What are some strategies that we can use to get to this stage then? Our first one is to fill your window and then delete stuff. So having that empty project staring us in the face is really intimidating. Having that empty timeline to fill. Is there another one coming? Yes, there is. There absolutely is. Having an empty timeline to fill can be a real block to your creativity because it just feels like there's so much to do and you don't really know where to start. Just throwing some stuff in at random without even listening to it can be a really great way to just get a block of clay on the, what do they call those things that they spin clay? Is it just like a turntable or a wheel, a spinning wheel? No, that's for yarn and stuff. Whatever it is, you're getting the block of clay ready to be worked on and then molding it, shaping it, taking bits away, adding new stuff to it. And it's just about having a starting point that you can then listen to and go through and make the changes that you want to make as you kind of hear them. This is a really great tip for those of you who don't really know where to start with arranging stuff. Just get as much stuff in your arrangement as you want to have. Say if you want to have a 3-minute track or a 5-minute track or whatever, throw loads of stuff in at random, don't worry too much about where it falls along the bar lines, any of that kind of stuff, and then start listening through it and think, okay, does this have a satisfying arc? What can I do to strip things back, build them back up again, and give my arrangement that feeling of kind of authorship that is probably going to be lacking if you're just kind of throwing stuff in at random. Our second strategy is to make a small change every 4 bars or maybe 8 bars. This is something that is trying to make you think about how do you maintain interest in your track. It could be that you've got a really lovely vocal or a really great virtuosic instrumental part that is drawing the listener's attention and giving them something to focus on. And in that case, you might not need to change something but we're just trying to get thinking about where are the places that we can make small adjustments, not the kind of thing that is going to draw the listener's attention directly to the change that you made, but these subtle adjustments that are going to give your track a feeling of life, a feeling of dynamics, and make it feel like there's stuff happening. This could be as simple as taking a snare drum out or changing from one variation of a bass line to another variation and then back again over the course of 8 bars or something like that. Just making these small subtle changes that don't, strictly speaking, need to change in order for the track to work, but that actually give it a feeling of life and a feeling of interest that is difficult to get when everything is just staying static for big chunks at a time. If you try this and make a small change every 4 bars and it feels like there's too much going on, there's too much chopping and changing, feel free to reverse some of those changes, ignore any of the advice that I'm giving you at any point if what you're listening to and what you're hearing isn't conforming to what you want it to sound like, or the kind of thing that is informing your taste. That's the really important thing here, is to just try some of this stuff out. And if it doesn't work for you, then at least now you know, okay, I've got a strategy in my back pocket and I know why this thing doesn't work, but maybe there's a different way that I can make it work for me. Strategy 3, don't change one thing at a time and don't change everything at the same time. So there's a kind of a 2-part thing here. There's a really common structure to particularly electronic music from producers that I listen to who are just starting out, just getting their feet wet, still trying to develop their musical chops and their production ability, their songwriting ability, and tell me if this is you, because I suspect either you probably started out making songs like this or you're still doing that, in which case it's absolutely fine, but just have a think about what I'm going to tell you. It's this structure where we start off and we've got one element, and that one element plays for 4 bars, and then we get another element, and they both play together for 4 bars, and then we get a third element, and the tracks all build up. When you're listening to it, you can practically see the arrangement in your head in the DAW, whatever it is, where the tracks build up one at a time, layering up until everything you can hear is in the mix, and then they start to drop out again and they taper off, and that's how we get back down to our ending point. If you're making songs that sound like that, hi, that's how I started too. Don't worry. You're in a really great spot because it means that you're at least thinking about how do I make changes, layer things up, change my arrangement in a way that feels structured and interesting and has a dynamic arc from beginning to middle to end. What I would tell you, if you're one of those people, is to come back to that thing that I was saying earlier where the pattern recognition impulse is really strong and it can be really satisfying to feel like you know when a change is about to happen and for it to then happen. That's great. But what you also want to do is pepper in some of that variation. So if you're changing one thing at a time, if you only ever change one thing at a time, think about how you can vary that up and make it so that you do have some more dramatic shifts in your music where lots of things change. Maybe it is the case that you need a B section like we covered last time in stage 3, so that you've got more musical material to work with that's going to let you vary things up in a way that's not just adding everything in and then taking it all out. And then also not to change everything at the same time. We're talking here about having that strict, clear boundary line between your A section and your B section, or your verse and your chorus, where, okay, for a pop song, for instance, you might want it to be a fairly clear break between the verse and the chorus. But what if there's some cool element, maybe it's a rhythm that's being played on a percussion instrument or a little interjecting lead synth line or something like that that sits across both and is recontextualized in each section to have a different flavor and to play off of the other instruments around it in a really interesting way. But I think this not changing everything at the same time thing is especially relevant if, like me, you make dance music, because if we're trying to maintain a sense of rhythm, of groove, of continuity to keep people dancing, then having massive dynamic shifts can be a really interesting moment to try and harness on the dance floor, but it might also have the opposite effect to what you intend, where people can hear there's one thing happening for a while and then another thing happening for a while. And if you don't do something to try to keep things interesting within those chunks and then to maintain some continuity from one to the next, that can get just as stale as having the same thing for a really long time. It being too predictable, whether that's on the small changes level of one thing happening at a time or on the big changes level of everything happening at the same time. And then my last strategy, which is maybe the most important lesson I ever learned when it comes to arrangement, particularly for dance music, particularly for instrumental music, electronic music, never have every element playing at the same time. So why would you not want to do that? Well, if you've got every single element in your track playing at the same time, all of your drum layers, all of your synths, your guitars, your whatever it is that's making up the entirety of your track, if you've got everything in at the same time, the only place that you can go from there is to take something away and lower the intensity. That's fine if what you want to do is have a really intense moment and then strip things back and go down an energy level. But if what we're trying to do as dance music producers, instrumental music producers, any kind of genre where playing with the energy levels is something that you want to do really intentionally, if you hold at least one thing in reserve at all times, you've always got a different card to play where you can take one thing out and add a different thing in, and then take another two things out and add another one thing in. If you can chop and change and never give the full picture away, you've always got something dynamic and interesting. And crucially, you're able to keep things at the same energy level throughout an entire section of 32 bars or 64 bars or your drop or your build up or whatever it is. If you're trying to maintain a certain energy level for a certain part of your track, you need to have at least one or two things that you can swap in and out and not give the whole picture away, so that you can have those changes, have those things happening every few bars, have those small, subtle shifts happening within your track without kind of arranging yourself into a corner where you have only one direction to go, which is less intense, when actually what you want is either to maintain intensity or build even more intensity. That's something that I think is really, really key, and I'm going to show you how I use it right now as we get into the Ableton kind of follow along portion. So I hope you take some of this stuff on board, because I think all of this stuff is stuff that really informs my arranging process. Like I say, this is probably the most labor intensive part for me of making a track and trying to make sure that everything works. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into how I go about these things, and you're going to get even more of an insight as I actually dig into stuff now. All right, so here's our first check-in. I wanted to just kind of show you my starting point. I'm starting out in the A section, and I've just kind of blocked things out in a very rough way. So I know that for my style of music, what I like to have is 32 bars of an intro. That's about a minute of music. So that's time for the DJ to mix out of the previous song, mix this song in, and then after 32 bars, that's when the bass comes in and things kind of get going proper. So in this beginning section here, I'm trying to just build up from not nothing, but from, you know, a strip back point, so that we can kind of like have a build of intensity that gets to that kind of point where the bass comes in and things have an impact. At the same time, I'm trying to provide lots of rhythmic information for the DJ to latch onto in terms of making it mesh with the previous track, and also for the dancers as well to kind of get a feel for where things are going. So this is what I've got so far. I've just left that there as a note to myself to say, okay, here's where I want to bring those stabs back in with the 2-note chord pattern. So as you can hear, it's not super exciting at the moment, but I know that with the right automation, the right effects, I know my process, and I do a lot of layering on of effects after I've kind of blocked out the arrangement. So what I'm trying to do here is make it so that everything kind of makes sense and it feels like there's development and propulsion happening with just the basic elements on their own. And then as I kind of start to layer in more of those effects, make some of those changes, that's where the track really starts to come to life and makes sense and things kind of lock together. I've just now, while I'm listening, decided that I want to bring that snare drum in earlier. You can hopefully kind of see and hear how I'm trying to kind of change something, maybe not every 4 bars, but at least every 8 bars, where I've got new things coming in, things leaving the mix as well as things coming in. And I am also trying to, like with this kick drum here, it comes in actually a bar before that 8-bar line. So I'm trying not to make it so that every single change happens exactly on that 8-bar point. We're trying to keep things interesting in various different ways. So I'm going to do some more work on this and I will check back in with you momentarily. All right, so it's about 45 minutes since I finished recording that last section. And I've got my first draft of the song. This might be the fastest I've ever knocked out an arrangement. I don't know why. I guess I'm just feeling it today. But what I've done is I have exploded out all of the individual drum tracks. All you do is you go on your drum rack and you right click on the sound that you want to take out and you click extract chains, and that gives you each of the drums on its own MIDI track, just like this. So we can see, instead of having to look at the MIDI clip and try and figure out, okay, what's playing and what's not, we can kind of see fairly clearly which ones are playing and which ones aren't. Now, something that is probably worth mentioning is that I haven't used this organ sound at all, which is kind of a shame because I did like the sound, but what I found was it was making the song too sad. That nice, pretty minor 9th chord it's playing is really pretty, but it just made it overall a bit too emotionally available for my liking. I like my tracks to have an air of mystique about them and maybe some underlying emotions and some kind of feelings going on, but not too obviously and not too on the surface. So I'm going to delete that now. Okay, so I'll play the whole thing from start to end for the end of the video, but I just wanted to kind of walk you through some of the things that I have changed. So you may have noticed that there's this extra purple thing in here that wasn't in here before. This is a string sound. It's from, I've tweaked this preset, but it's from the Tyrell N6, which is a Yuhi freeware synth. It's kind of like a Juno-ish sort of thing. It's really great sounds. And I basically just decided that we needed some more tension in certain parts of the track. And that's what this is giving us. So that's one thing to note. The other thing is that I've kind of split up this pad sound here. So to walk you through the overall structure of my arrangement here, it's about a 6-minute track. Dance track. As I said before, we've got this 32-bar intro, that's the first minute leading up to when the bass comes in. So this section here that I've got highlighted is kind of like our A section. It's the main kind of thrust of the track. There's a kind of a fairly consistent energy level. There's a couple of dips and troughs just to kind of keep things moving. But this is where we're establishing the main kind of theme, the main sound of the track. And it's also where I'm going to do a lot of that bass automation on the bass synth. I'm going to be doing lots of effects, kind of like dub effects, echoes and reverbs and all of that kind of stuff. And that's what's going to keep things moving, keep things interesting in this section. Then you can see here, I've got this pad sound that's kind of fading in over these 16 bars, or however many it is, yeah, 16 bars. that leads us into this section here, which is kind of our B section. So we've got a lot of this pad sound, which is our chords, rather really characterful, flavorful chord sound. And we're basically enjoying that, letting it come in. You can see all of the kick drums go out when this extra layer of the pad sound comes in to give it maximum impact. So we're kind of like pulling back a bit with less percussion and drums, and then we're launching back into it for this kind of section here. But really, again, the pad is the kind of main star of the show in this bit here. Then we've got a bit of a cool off period right after the pad here. So when it drops out, we're kind of stripping everything back. And then the last sort of minute or so here is just a outro where we're just kind of going through, chopping and changing between a couple of different drum patterns and some very sparse, picked out different parts of that sampled pad sound to sort of just pepper it in and remind you, hey, this is where we just came from, as the track kind of draws to a close. That's pretty much the overall structure of it. Now, I will probably tweak a few things. I will probably pepper in some of the B section patterns in with the A section patterns, particularly with the drums. This is all subject to change, but my first draft, this is what we're kind of working with. A couple of things to note then. These kicks here, thinking through the kind of groupings of my drums in terms of the role that they occupy in the broader context of the track. So I've got the kick drums. You can see there's a couple of sections where we've got all the kick drums in at once, but they're doing a lot of changing, a lot of chopping in and out. Similarly, I would group together the snare and the clap and the cowbell. I don't think, okay, there's one point here where all three are playing at the same time, but it's either one of these, two of them, either the snare and the clap, or the clap and the cowbell, or the snare and the cowbell. And there's very little times where these mid-range drums are all playing at the same time. So again, holding something in reserve all the time, making sure that you've got something to shift, something to change, something to go back to at different points in your track. But yeah, hopefully you can kind of see that I'm trying to just kind of think about the different roles that our sounds are playing in the mix. If you go back to, I think, stage 2, when we're talking about building out the loop, thinking about the roles that our individual parts are playing and trying to get them out of each other's way, or make sure that we're using them in a way that gets the absolute most we can out of each of them. So yeah, that's all of that. If you want to hear the full first draft of this arrangement, I'm going to put it at the end of the video. So stay tuned, keep watching for that. But right now, let's go wrap up. Thank you very much for following along with all of that. I hope you found it interesting, useful, insightful. I'm really pleased with how this track is turning out. This was kind of a bit of an experiment, this video series. I wanted you to see the kind of honest process of how I get through each stage of finishing a track. And yeah, like I say, it's come together in a really quick manner that is pretty unlike how I usually go through things. So even just kind of thinking through all of this stuff, trying to explain it, trying to pick it apart, is helping me in my own practice. So I hope it's helping you as well. I can't wait for next time, where we're getting stuck into a finalized arrangement and we're talking about adding the finishing touches, the extra effects, the extra one-off sounds and little kind of interjections that bring a track over the finish line and turn it from something that's pretty good into something that's really, really great and really interesting and really exciting to listen to, dance to, mope to, whatever it is, whatever you're aiming to kind of try and cultivate in your listeners. These are the kind of like little sprinklings of sugar and spice that set it all off. So we're going to get into that next time around. If you've watched this whole thing, please subscribe to the channel and like the video, because there's plenty more where this came from. And stick around right now. I'm going to do a screen recording of the full track and you can listen to the whole thing as it stands at the moment. I'm going to sign off, take care, and I will see you in the next one.